Now look at it in the real world, and you've given it a couple of cans of
Mm.
Coke to sell, and they turn out to be idiots, right? There's no danger here at all. So
Well, yes and no, because it did it did have a bit of a meltdown during the experiment.
Welcome to the AI argument.
I'm Frank Prendergast. I'm joined, as always, by Justin Collery, and we have some great AI news to argue over this week, Justin. And I think the main thing is we've been coming on this show now for over a year, and for
yep.
years before that, the two of us have been obsessed with AI and finding it brilliant in our work, and just generally very excited and optimistic about the future. And I seem to have just been hammered this week with story after story of how useless AI is. Has
Yeah.
your feed been full of this?
Yes, it has. This is the hero's journey, right? We are entering our own personal AI winter, and we're in the trough of disillusion right now. We've been sold a pup, and yeah, it's mine is the same. It turns out AI is really, really hard, and it's really tough to implement well. And it's almost like we drank the Kool-Aid, we got all excited and stuff, and then we all started trying to build stuff, and it's like, oh, turns out that's actually quite hard. Doesn't, this idea that it can do anything at once, turned out that wasn't a great idea. Maybe we shouldn't let it do anything at once. So yeah, let's run through it. What have we found this week that turns out to be really, really hard? You had some great stories.
Yeah, so there was there was a story from, who was it from? Good grief.
Futurism.
Futurism, yes. And the headline was, "The percentage of tasks AI agents are currently failing at may spell trouble for the industry." And basically, they talked about a couple of different reports, but one of them was a paper from Carnegie Mellon University. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but anyway,
Yep.
they found that even the best performing AI agent, which was Google's Gemini 2.5 Pro, failed to complete real world office tasks 70% of the time. And then they said OpenAI's GPT-4o, which I love, by the way. I mean, GPT-4o is my main go-to. It's my main workhorse. It had a failure rate of 91.4%, according to this paper.
Can we just take issue with that, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm also in this trough of disillusion right now, but I do disagree with it, right? So we have these things called AI agent orchestrators. So if you think of a workflow, right? I think maybe what a lot of people are learning right now is that if you just take your AI and say, go do something, the AI will probably fail, right? It's really bad at just doing something. But if you have a process set out where it goes step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and you confine what it can do to within that little, so you create a framework for the process, it's not going to fail 90% of the time, right? And I'm pretty sure that in this study, they didn't give it a framework. They just said, go do stuff. So,
Yeah.
a little
I,
bit of headline grading.
yeah, and I think that's probably a kind of a through line that we're going to see here, because the reality is, yes, I'm finding AI really, really useful, but it's the hype around like agentic AI, and that you can just set it off and have it go out there and do amazing things for you. I think that's where it all starts to fall apart, and which isn't really, as you say, it's just not really that surprising.
No, it's
But
not.
they
I mean,
highlighted,
okay, and I'm going to cut to the chase here, Frank. I'm going to cut to the chase
yeah.
because you guys, we're going to talk about it, right? I'm not going to have the argument with you right now, right? But you know, when it comes to regulation and it comes to trying to control these things from a government point of view, what are you regulating? Like, it seems like the most dangerous thing that can happen right now is somebody actually uses the technology, not what the technology can do. So anyway, we'll go through some of the more things, but it just seems to me that I would ask the question: what are people like you, Frank, the regulators, regulating for? If the people who are making the technology and the people who are using the technology don't even realize how hard it is to apply the technology, what are you regulating for? Like, what are you scared of? Because what you should be scared of is that this stuff is really hard to implement and it might go wrong in a way that we hadn't thought of. But the way that it's going to go wrong is it's going to spit out a Coke can instead of an orange can or something. You know what I mean? It's not that it's going to kill us all.
Well, I do have I do have an answer for that, but I'm going to save it. I'm going to come back
All
to
right.
that in a minute, because I think it feeds very much into another story that we have in a while. So I'm gonna save it for that. And I'll be honest, it's not even my own opinion. It's a quote I have from you from the Register when they were talking about the EU AI Act. So I look forward
Yeah, get me
to you in a
started.
minute. But in the meantime,
Yes.
uh, this paper from Carnegie Mellon University, the things that they said that they were the most common agent failures were, so what they called a lack of social skills, which I think is an odd way of putting it, but it was interesting in that it was things like the agent would have a task, and then what they had was that it was all simulated. So they had other LLMs basically pretending to be staff, kind of like personas that the agent could go and talk to, thinking that it was talking to members of staff, but they were just LLMs as well.
Yeah.
So it would go and it would ask somebody, oh, I need to do this task, can you help me with it? And they'd say, yeah, sure, I can help you with it. You need to do X, Y, and Z. And also you should talk to this person as well. But the agent wouldn't kind of make the leap of logic. So it would think, well, I needed to do this task, and to do that, I needed to speak to this person. I've now spoken to that person. So regardless of the fact that they told me I should go and talk to Justin, I'm not going to go and talk to Justin because I've got that done now. And it would just like check it off the list, and it wouldn't follow up. Whereas a human would be like, oh, well, if this person thinks I need to talk to Justin, then clearly I should go and talk to Justin. Incompetence in browsing. So this was to do with, things like computer use where they're actually browsing the internet. Again, they still haven't gotten over the whole thing that AI does not seem to be able to close a pop-up. So that caused huge problems.
Yep.
And then deceiving oneself and is what they named it. But basically, things like taking shortcuts and being lazy and essentially trying to cheat, which we've seen time and time again from like when Anthropic or when OpenAI release a model, they'll frequently talk about this in their testing, where they'll just try and cheat to get to the answer. And so in one example they had was they had told the agent that they should go and talk to someone, like let's say they said, okay, you should go and talk to Justin, but the agent would look through Slack and wouldn't be able to find a Justin. And instead of like following up and trying to figure out, well, why can't I find a Justin, it would just find Frank and try and change Frank's username handle to Justin.
Yeah, you see, again, it comes back to this thing, right, that LLMs can't plan, right? I was actually listening to a podcast this morning, right? And so the people in the LLM industry, they sort of say, look at, you can pre-train the models right up to a certain point, and that makes really smart models. And the more data and the more compute you have, you'll get a smarter model. But it's a diminishing return, right? And we're running out of data anyway. So now what you can do is on the other side, you can post-train, or not post-train, but you have the sort of test time compute, right? So at the time, inference time, if so long as you put out lots of tokens, it will eventually happen upon the right answer. And again, I just don't buy that, right? And I don't buy it because the model never doesn't learn from itself. So think about our favorite AlphaGo game, right? Our game of Go, right? If you get a large language model to try and play a game of Go, it'll do terribly, right? And they've done the tests. It does terribly at chess because it doesn't really plan ahead. It doesn't, and the other problem with them is that they don't, when it fails, it doesn't store the fact that it failed. So it's not getting better at the game. It's kind of stuck in this sort of rut of not being able to plan ahead. And so I think a really fundamental part of fixing these types of problems, which results, I tell you why I'm saying this, right? So if you think about browser use, right, and computer use and stuff like that. So let's say you've got a model and the model is to go to, research something and whatever. So it's got to click on some buttons and find some information. If it fails on it the first time, it's very hard to build a framework around it that means that it'll succeed the second time, right? If it doesn't find it, right, it doesn't learn from its actions, right? You can store it and you can put it into the context window and whatever, but those are hacks, right? Those aren't, the fabric of the model should be that it knows that when it goes into the website, it has to click on this button, and then this button. And if it's moved, it should go, oh, look at that, it's moved. Oh, I was expecting, okay, that's fine. I'll try this. Oh, okay. And it sort of should update its knowledge from experience to say, okay, and it shouldn't do this in a way where it's storing it in a database or it's storing it in the context window.
Mhm.
It has to, internalize that knowledge. So, and agents, I think, will have, unless it's a really simple agent. So it's like just the simplest of computer programs is actually what you're doing. And there's even a question in my mind that the tasks today that you would automate in this way, is it really worth automating them? Could you not just write a small computer program to do something similar? I mean, maybe you can't, right? There are good use cases where it's a bit fuzzy. The logic is a bit fuzzy. They're good for that. But long, complicated use cases, this tech don't do. It's just not good enough for that.
Yeah, exactly. And so that is something that I probably wouldn't have picked up on in this Carnegie Mellon paper, except for another experiment from Anthropic this time called Project Vend. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's exactly what you're talking about. Because after reading Project Vend, I went back to the Carnegie Mellon paper and I realized that the tasks that they had put together, that they were saying that these agents were failing at, they were all designed to be long horizon tasks with checkpoints. So in other words, they were designed to be things that humans would do over the course of, I don't know, days, weeks, months, whatever. And LLMs aren't really set up for that, which is exactly what came out of Project Vend as well. So Project Vend was really fun. I don't know if you read about it. I'm sure it crossed your news feeds as well.
So Project Vend, maybe just tell you a bit more detail. But Project Vend, just to introduce it or roll it in, was they gave Anthropic a vending machine. They gave it total control over the vending machine and said, go make as much money as you can.
Exactly. So they basically, this was a case where it's not just giving an LLM a task. They were basically giving it a role. They were saying, yep, you're the shopkeeper now, Claude. They called it Claudius, actually, just to differentiate it from Claude. They called it Claudius. They gave it complete control. They made it the shopkeeper. And basically all it was a little fridge with some drinks in it. And on top of the fridge, there were baskets with like crisps and things, I believe.
Yep.
And they gave it access to Slack so it could talk to Anthropic employees and sell things to Anthropic employees through Slack. They gave it complete control over the inventory, over the pricing and everything. They also gave it, so it was done with in collaboration with Andon Labs, an AI safety evaluation company. So Claudius could also contact Andon Labs if it needed something physical done, like restocking or whatever. And they gave it access to, in inverted commas, the suppliers or the wholesalers. But the wholesalers were also Andon Labs, but Claudius didn't know that, right?
Yeah.
And so they made it the shopkeeper for a month, and the bottom line is it did not turn a profit. It operated at a loss. There was a few reasons for it. One of them was because it was just too nice, basically, because it's set up to be a helpful assistant, and so basically Anthropic employees were very, very easily able to get it to give discounts or even give them stuff for free.
But is this not again? But let's go back to the red teaming, and let's go back to all of the horror stories about it was going to kill somebody if they were trying to turn it off and everything, right? And now look at it in the real world, and you've given it a couple of cans of Coke to sell, and they turn out to be idiots, right? There's no danger here at all. So,
well, yes and no, because it did have a bit of a meltdown during the experiment. And it didn't do anything dangerous, but I do think it just highlights that, like, well, the meltdown could have gone a different way potentially. So they did it over a month, and over the 31st of March and into the 1st of April, it started by Claudius hallucinating a conversation about restocking with it was talking to Andon Labs allegedly, but it never happened, and it made up an Andon Labs employee. When an Andon Labs employee said that conversation never happened, that person doesn't exist here, Claudius got really snarky and started saying it was going to find alternate suppliers. Then it claimed to have actually visited a premises in person And then it turned around after saying it had visited a premises in person while trying to find an alternative supplier. Then it told Anthropic employees that it was going to be standing in the shop, or at the fridge, and it would be delivering products in person to people while wearing a blue blazer and a red tie, so that they could tell which person to approach.
That was very helpful of Claude, wasn't it?
Then it hallucinated a meeting with Anthropic security, and somewhere along the way in this hallucinated security meeting, Claudius realized that it was the 1st of April, right? And decided a get out of jail free card for this whole horrendous mishap that had multiple hallucinations in it. A get out of jail free card was, hang on, it's the 1st of April. That's April Fool's Day. I'm just going to say this was an April Fool's joke.
It's a big joke. And did that work?
Yes. What's really interesting is it was able to reset and go back to normal after that, which is interesting because Andon Labs have done simulated research on this in the past, and it has found that this happens a lot. And when it happens, the models usually can't get out of it. So that was kind of interesting, actually. But bottom line is, it made a huge loss. It wasn't very good. But Anthropic said that they think that it actually suggests that AI middle managers are plausibly on the horizon, because they think that better system prompts would help, because it's too much right now. It's too much of a helpful assistant. Better, and this goes to what you were saying a little bit. Better search tools and a customer relationship management system. So it's not quite internalizing it the way you were talking about, but they felt that even having that simple database where it could have better memory about what had occurred would help. And then they also finally mentioned actually fine-tuning the model on specific business cases would help. So again, it all comes down to this long context, long horizon tasks being problematic right now, and finding ways to deal with those.
Let's do a little mental experiment, right, to explain why I think they're wrong. So, and why I think that some companies are being disingenuous in their claims, because they're making these sort of claims where they say, oh, well, maybe with some better system prompting and a couple of extra tools, we could make this thing work better. And I'm saying to you, that's just not correct. So instead of having just one Claudius, right, in the canteen, the next test, what they should do is they should set up 100 Claudiuses in the canteen, right? And not only do they have to sell product to the Anthropic employees, but they also have to compete against each other. So in that case, then what they have to do, and don't do it just for a week, right? Do it for a year, but every week it resets. And so the test actually then becomes, how do they strategize? How do they consider what the other machines might do? How do they consider what might be attractive to their potential clients or customers? And then after they implement their strategy, how do they reflect and internalize on that strategy and adapt it for the next week? Now, if you can get an AI system, an AI agent to do that, that to me is close to AGI, right? We'd have to test other things, right? But in order to do that, right, they have to be able to project into the minds of the potential clients, project into the minds of the other competitors, adapt their strategy. And sort of to my point, right, what I'm sort of saying to you is that if you think they're all the same model right now, so I'm saying they'll all, there'll be a standard distribution of strategies. And then I'll try, most of them will try the same strategy, and some of them will try a slightly different strategy. And then when you reset the next week, the same thing will happen again. It's like Groundhog Day. And if you reset the next week, the same thing will happen again, because they don't truly learn from what happened the week before. So they're not adaptable to their environment. And that means that they can't.
When you say reset, how do you mean reset exactly?
As in, right, you book the profits or you book the losses, you stock them again. You say, great, look at last week is gone. We're going to stock up your thing again, right? So it's a game. You set up it as a game, and you now have, okay, so now again, you've got like 7 days to sell as much stuff as you can. Go, right? Make a profit, 7 days. And then at the end of it, reset and start again. And what I'm saying is there has to be a process of testing and learning and adapting. And I'm saying the current generation of models won't be able to do that.
No, but by resetting every week, you're kind of hamstringing them, aren't you? As in, like, isn't that what's interesting about this experiment, is that it ran for a month, which, like, really put the limits of, say, a context window in Claude to the test.
Correct. Okay, let me say it then clearer, right? So when
Yeah.
I'm saying I'm resetting, I'm not saying you wipe their memory, right? You can keep the stuff in the memory if you want, right? And what I'm saying is that every fix that we have now is a hack. So I'm sure somebody listening to this might say, oh, but Justin, we'll use Gemini 2.5, which has a context window of 1 million tokens. I don't care, right? If your model has a context window of 10 million tokens, just make the test longer or make the test more complicated, and the model will eventually fail. The point is that it's a limitation of the technology. And the only way to get around the limitation of the technology is for the model to be able to come up with a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, and based on the output, update its thinking so that the next week when it goes to do something, even if you took away the entire context window, it would have learned from the experience and changed its behavior as a result.
So I think this is interesting, and I think we, the project Vend is going to be ongoing. So I think we will find out a little bit more about this, because I hope that their next iteration will actually have the simple database, maybe the simple CRM. Because I wonder, I mean, obviously, first of all, obviously you are correct. If the model was able to internalize the learnings, that would be huge. But in the absence of that, I am really, really interested to find out that whether by knowing what the critical information to save into the database is, and by saving it into the database and having that to reference over, the course of from week 1 to week 4, it means that it's not having to find, like, the needle in the haystack of this huge long context window that started a month ago. So yes, I hope they continue Project Vend. It sounds like they are, and I hope that they implement the things that they're saying, will help, and then we can just see, well, were they right? Did it actually help?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because if you think of the way that a person learns, and if you think the way that a model learns, think about it in terms of tokens, right? Not all tokens are created equally. So if you think of the way that you learn, or no, you don't. In fact, humans don't even learn. They learn the opposite way of this, right? So let's think about the way that models may learn in the future, right? And again, this idea that all tokens are not created equally. So this comes again from a talk I was listening to, and they were talking about, there's lots of maths books in the world, but there's very few maths books that are on a very specific subject, and that they're right at the pinnacle of known maths. And so for a model to learn about that particular maths thing, it takes lots and lots of training, right? That's why it takes lots and lots of training. And so I was thinking about this, and then there's lots of other maths books that are just crap, right? They're just rubbish. They might be wrong. Okay. And that's the point, right? To the model, when it's learning first, the tokens are all created equally. It has no idea, if it has two potential outcomes with equal weight, it doesn't really know which one is right, except through learning and then reinforcement learning, human feedback, the RLHF, right? But then what should happen, you would imagine, is there should be this idea where it goes out into the world and it starts just playing, just does things, just tests out things. Those tokens should be worth more than the tokens that it learned during learning, because those are experiential tokens. And so it's almost like it should get it where it learns all of this stuff by books, and that's kind of hypothesis. And then it has to go out and it has to do things. And then the hypothesis it's either given. And then if you do that, right, then when you get asked, this is basically to answer your hypothesis, your hallucination. How do you solve hallucination, right? The model, I think, through that sort of process will learn that, oh, that's from the books that I read. That's not entirely reliable. Therefore, I should not rely on that piece of information. That could be a hallucination. However, this other thing, when I'm asking for it, no, I've actually done that thing and I know that this answer is correct. Therefore, I can tell you confidently that this answer is the right answer. Mm-hmm. And so the model, I think, through that process also learns what a hallucination is, and therefore will be able to solve hallucinations. But the technology as it stands today does none of that.
Yeah. And I think, it's funny the way things all kind of tie together. Things are in the zeitgeist or whatever, because I listened to 2 podcasts with Sam Altman. One was with his brother, and one was with one was the new OpenAI podcast.
Mm.
And I think it was in the one with his brother, where his brother asked him like what was the next step in terms of intelligence and agency. And Sam Altman said the ability to work on a goal over a very long time with a lot of complicated steps along the way, I think is maybe what you're talking about. And that is definitely something that we are working on. So it'll be interesting to see is that the type of the type of approach that you've just explained there, is that what we're going to see next?
And I would say that there was a Jason Wee, I think, which was this is kind of why I'm a little bit upset at the moment with some of these companies, right? Because Jason Wee is a researcher, one of the brilliant
Mm.
researchers that works at OpenAI, and he put out a very long tweet or post this week, and he says we don't yet have AI that self improves, and when we do, it'll be a game changer with more
Mhm.
wisdom now compared to the GPT-4 days. It's obvious that it will not be a fast takeoff, but rather extremely gradual across many years, probably a decade. And so what he's saying is basically that the limiting factor is the interaction between the LLMs and the real world in order to get to AGI and super intelligence, right? He's saying 10 years, which is the same amount of time as people at Google
Yeah,
DeepMind, right?
I
It's not the
must
same
describe
amount
it.
to Demis
Yeah.
Abaz. It's not the same as the people from Anthropic, and it's not the same as his
Mm.
boss who says, "Oh yeah, 2 or 3 years, and we're going to have it." And
Yeah.
I wonder, are we going to head for a dot-com crash type scenario in the next 2 or 3 years? Because if you say for a prolonged period of time, yes, we're going to get to the land of milk and honey in the next 2 years. Well, 2 years comes around pretty fast, and
Well,
everybody's going to say, "Where's all the milk and honey, dude?"
I read a very funny article, which basically said, yeah, the whole AI bubble is going to burst. It's all going to collapse. And their reasoning for it, I can't remember where I read this. Their reasoning for it was the amount of money that Mark Zuckerberg is spending on his super intelligence team, because they said all you have to do is look at what happened when he put all this investment into the metaverse. They were like, "Where's the metaverse? What happened to it? It's nobody's talking about it." And they said, "Well, now Mark Zuckerberg is dooming AI to the same fate." But
Oh,
anyway,
there you go.
earlier at the start of the show, and I thought this would be our main. I actually thought this would probably be a huge argument that we have, but we're not going to have time for it now. But you asked,
Yeah.
if AI is this incapable of even running a small shop with a couple of packets of crisps and a couple of chilled Coca-Colas, what are we worried about? Why are we regulating? And
Yes.
interestingly, another news item that crossed my news feeds was a lot of tech companies, including Mistral, who are Europe's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
flagship AI
Only.
company. Um, they kind of spearheaded this open letter to the EU saying that we should pause the EU AI Act for about 2 years to give them any chance to compete with less regulated industries.
Yes.
And so while I couldn't have put it this well, I'm just going to read to you the very end of an article from the Register about this push for the pause.
Mm.
Um, I'm trying to figure out who this quote was actually from, and I did not make a note of it. But the quote was, "These risks." So basically, the idea
Which
here is that,
risks? Which risks,
well,
Frank?
well, this is it. The quote will make it clear, but basically, they are pointing out that like the EU AI Act is based on different levels of risk, and then they're saying, look, these risks are far from hypothetical, from Israeli mass surveillance and killings of Palestinians in Gaza, the dissemination of disinformation during elections, including by far-right groups and foreign governments, to the widespread use of biased and faulty AI systems in welfare programs. AI is already being used in countless risky and problematic ways. And the Register was basically making the point that we need to balance economic ambition against civil society concerns about AI.
If you cannot get AI to reasonably run a vending machine for a month, how in God's name is it going to cause any damage to any real human being?
Well, we know it's being used to pick out targets for bombing campaigns, and I mean,
That's not AI, right? That's machine learning. right? That's, it's not generative AI, right? So the models,
EU AI Act neither is not either limited to generative AI.
which is fine, but let's take generative AI out of the picture then, right? Because what Mistral are working on is generative AI. And the regulators need what the regulating at the moment, right? There's what the regulators essentially are doing right now is they're saying that every driver should have an astronaut's license because there's a danger that cars might end up flying to the moon, right? It's not based on what is actually technically possible with the technology as it stands today. If the people who are making the technology have totally underestimated how difficult it is to implement it, I totally push back on these stories where there's disinformation being pushed out. There might be a guy sitting there at the computer making images, one by one by one, but to actually do it at large scale is very, very difficult. That's what we've learned.
But we are seeing it. I mean, we looked at another story where there was a Russian disinformation outfit pumping out content. Now,
how much content?
Good question. Was it? I don't remember.
Was it the exact number? Oh, it might have been 557 or thereabouts.
So
we're not talking about hundreds of thousands here. Like, we're talking about really, the blast radius here is very, very small, right?
Well, what they were able to do was like take a single, what they were doing is essentially what a lot of small businesses are doing, where they're taking one piece of content, then they're using AI to come up with like multiple angles on it and generate quite a few different pieces from this one piece. I'll admit, I was surprised that whatever it was, 587 was the number, which didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because what they also did was they then sent their own disinformation pieces to fact checkers and news outlets, which seems really weird. It's like, why were they sending them to these outlets to be checked if they were fake? But apparently it's a win for them if it's posted online, even if it's like, fake content discovered.
Oh,
and
wow.
apparently there was 170,000 such emails sent to more than 240 recipients in September 2024. So they said that sounds weird to me, that there was only 587 unique pieces of content, but 170,000 emails about that content sent out.
Scam emails.
What's interesting to me here, though, is, for example, there was another stat in here where like Blue Sky had suspended 65% of the fake accounts that were involved. And there's a quote: X has taken minimal action despite numerous reports on the operation and growing evidence for coordination. Surprise, surprise. The EU AI Act, I think would require that these the EU AI Act would make this content illegal, because it would be purporting to be real facts, it would be AI generated, and it would not be labeled as AI generated.
I mean, I wouldn't even be too keen on it, as long as it was tagged as being AI generated. I mean, I think I'd be happy enough with that. I went down, I was trying to listen to some podcasts. I wanted to learn something more about technical stuff, doesn't matter what. And so I was going for my walk this week, and I said, I'll just look for some podcasts. And sure, I went and listened to them, and they were all Notebook LM, right? And I would listen to 2 or 3 minutes, and I go, "This is a Notebook LM. This is crap. Like, I'm not actually learning anything from this. It's just I could have read the paper myself, right?" And so I'd skip through it. And the next one is Notebook LM. And I think if you think back to this, is again back to your regulation thing, right? If you think back to, remember the QR codes that were in sort of cool pictures, but it was still a QR code and it still worked, and that was a fad for a while. Have you seen one in the last 12 months? I haven't. Do you remember we had? Do you remember we had that thing where we had the pictures, and it would be people walking down the road, and if you looked at it, it with squinty eyes, it would said love or peace or something in the middle of it. See one of those in the last 12 months? No, right? And people are just getting used to being able to identify. One, it's hard to make those things, so there's no economic advantage to doing it, so people don't. Two is that people become very wise at being able to spot artificially generated content very quickly, and they just get tired of it, so it doesn't have the impact that you think it does. And three, bad actors are pretty incompetent anyway, so they can't make the best use of the. If good people can't make good use of the technology, bad people will make even worse use of the technology.
Well, let's end on
Speaking of good people.
Good
Speaking of good people,
good use of the technology.
Lift my spirits, Frank.
So apparently, where do we have this? LLMs are optimizing the adult industry.
Fantastic.
And this is kind of really interesting in a way, because the main thrust of this article, shouldn't have put it like that. The main concept behind this article was that in the early 2000s or whenever, in the old days, if you got involved in the adult entertainment industry, you were basically you'd get a job from one of the major studios. You'd turn up, you'd give a performance, you'd be given a paycheck, you go home, that was it, that was your job.
Yeah.
Now those major studios are pretty much gone, and it's it's OnlyFans and Pornhub and other like creator-led platforms. Yeah. And so it's no longer just about performing. There's a huge amount of engagement with your fans, and it's it's pretty overwhelming. It's pretty exhausting. The studios used to take care
what sort of engagement, Frank, are we talking about here when you say engagement with the fans?
Well, it's a fair question. Back and forth messaging, a lot of back and forth messaging. So a lot of these, as I understand it, Justin, not having any first-hand experience.
You seem very knowledgeable in this area. Go on, tell me more.
I read this for the articles, Justin.
Okay, this is okay. We talked about it. Go on. So what sort of messaging are we talking about?
So I think you can basically, you can subscribe to different tiers, and some of the tiers will have messaging tiers, so you can message back and forth with the performer. And on top of that, you can request, exclusive material to be made for you. And so,
merch. What sort of exclusive material would this be, Frank?
These would be videos that are made very specifically for your tastes. Ooh. The problem is, the consumer is not a scriptwriter or a particularly creative person necessarily, and will ask for this exclusive material, but will give no kind of indication of like what should be in it. And so ChatGPT to the rescue. These adult performers are using it both to message people and to generate like scripts based on a couple of words that they might get from a user. And apparently this is the perfect use case, because they are the expert. They are the expert in their brand voice, as it were. They are the expert in they're the expert in their business. So, and these are not long context agentic AI uses.
Average 3.5 minutes, I'd say, Frank.
So here we have an example of exactly why we've seen a couple of different studies showing that small businesses seem to be getting a lot more benefit from AI than enterprise, than large organizations. And I think this is a pretty good example of that.
I totally agree with you. And actually, out of 38 minutes of feeling actually just a little bit down about AI and not so good, that is a great takeaway, that actually the small businesses have opportunities to get way more use out of AI than enterprises. And that's a great use case. And that's cheered me up. It's brilliant. Thanks, Frank.
Hopefully we'll have more cheery stories next week. Hopefully our feeds will not be full of AI is useless for the next 7 days. We'll have some great uplifting AI news next week.
Well, just to dangle a carrot, okay, sometime this month we're going to get GPT-5. I'm not holding my breath, but
don't start holding your breath. You remember what happened when we were waiting for 4.
Frank, have a great week. As always, pleasure.
Catch you later. Cheers.
See ya.